like to welcome you out to our luncheon today. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our luncheon today. It looks like we've got a full house, and we're grateful for that. I'd like to remind you all to turn your phones off or put them on vibrate so we're not disturbed at this time. I am Dean Amick, your board president for the year, and it's great to be able to see us all together again after so much time apart. So we're really happy to have you here. We're going to get started today with an invocation by Austin Lund from National Property Inspections, and then the Pledge of Allegiance will be given by Wendy Fisher at Red Rock Real Estate.
Grateful for this day, for the opportunity we have to meet together and this company. We ask that thou bless us food, do us well, power for the rest of the day. We pray for rain at this time, or ask that we be able to receive what is needed as we say these things in Jesus Christ. Amen.
At this time, we'd like to recognize all past presidents of the board. So if you are a past president of the Board of Realtors, would you stand please? All right, thank you very much. If you look on your sheet there, we have quite a few new realtor members. If you're new since our last luncheon, would you please stand? There we go, all right. This Saturday we have an event coming up. Is there anybody from Keller Williams here that can tell us about that? Anyone? No one from Keller Williams? Oh. Would you like to tell us a little bit about it? Come on up. Just up to you know, that would be great. I know it's Saturday morning. Use the message.
Okay, it's this Saturday. It is fun run. It's for Detective Josh Wilson of the Center City Police Department. He's been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, so we're trying to raise money for his family. We've got a goal of 50,000, so we are really hoping for a really big turnout. There will be a 5K fun run starting at 7:30, a 1 mile walk. There will be costumes, so we do have a nice prize for the best costume. So we just want you to come and have fun. At 9 a.m., we'll have a carnival at the Bloomington Park, the one by Nana Bloor. We've got inflatables, we have camel rides, the camels from Tuacahn will be there. There's a dunk tank. The Bardell will be on, so come and down to Bardell. We've got other community leaders that have volunteered to be in the jump tank. We have Minute games. We're going to try to set a Guinness Book of World Record for a balloon toss, food trucks. I think that's everything. Yeah, invite your clients. We're also looking for donations. So at the very least, come and have fun with your family. And if you can donate, on the flyer here is a link that you can go on to donate.
Thank you. flyer that she just referenced is on our members-only webpage, so you can get more information there. Just looking ahead here, July 5th is our Independence Day of observation, so the board office will be closed. July 15th, my birthday, great. We will be here for a board luncheon, and we'll celebrate that. We'll have a speaker that will follow, be a part 2 to this month's speaker, Nathan Moses, and he'll be speaking on more water. And so we want to be here for that. July 23rd, the board office will be closed for Pioneer Day observation. Don't forget that August 9th to 11th is the UAR convention. Does anybody know where that's at? Maui, okay? So get ready and let's all get over there and have a good time. And maybe so that we can have a good time. And then last but not least, September 8th through 9th is our Red Rock Retreat. You can register at wcbr.org. And the price is $195 on July 1st. Okay? Is there any other, before we get started here, is there any other announcements or questions that we might have? Okay, so let's get into it. So today we're going to hear from Zach Renstrom. We appreciate him coming out and speaking with us. He's the General Manager for the Washington County Water Conservancy District. In this capacity, he oversees all operational and financial activities for the district. The district secures, treats, and delivers water to Washington County municipalities that serve nearly 200,000 residents and 6 million annual visitors. Renstrom joined the district in 2019 after serving as a Washington County Commissioner with nearly 2 decades of engineering experience and 10 years of legal experience. We're really grateful for him to be here today to speak to us, so let's give him a round of applause and turn it over to him.
I appreciate everybody coming out today. It was crazy when they gave me the invitation to come and speak. Well, that was like 2 months ago. And I looked at my calendar. It's actually been 2 years ago that I was here and had the opportunity to come and speak to you. And it's nice because hopefully you forgot all my jokes from my last presentation, so I can review the jokes and you'll laugh at those. Anyway, I'm just going to dive in. I won't talk too much about my background because I did that last time. But right now, the big discussion, of course, with water right now is the drought and what's going on with the drought. So I wanted to get on that and talk about that. So this is the state of Utah, and with droughts we have categories, kind of like they do with hurricanes. And right now, if you look at our state, the entire state's in a drought scenario, but we're right down here, kind of in the bold upside of this drought. We're in the worst condition you could be in. Now, I'm going to go through some of that data and explain it, what's going on, why I am concerned. So, one of the things that we do is we monitor our water pack and what's going on with water all the time. We're always making projections of where we're going to be. And the last couple of years have not been very good to us, but this year has been the worst on record, and I'm going to show you why. So, above Zions National Park and up in Pine Valley, there's very sophisticated equipment that measures the snowfall. We call them snow-tail sites, and they measure how the depth of the snow, how much water is in the snow, the temperature, the wind, and we take that data and we plug it into our models. And so we take that data, we stick it in the model, and then it gives us a prediction of what's going to happen in a couple of years in advance. And these models are very sophisticated, they do a really good job. But the problem with models is they're based upon history. And so they can say, well, if we had this scenario in the past, and this is what happened, and so you do that. And so all of a sudden, with these really sophisticated models, when you throw a new variable into them, they go kind of wacky. And so all of a sudden last fall, the models started kind of going wacky, and this is one of the reasons why. So our water year starts on October 1st. And what happened this year, so this shows how much precipitation we've received in our watershed down here above Zions. So to put this perspective, that blue line right there is the maximum ever recorded for a particular year. So you can see that's a lot. For some reason it's not showing up there. But the green, there's supposed to be a green line that's kind of right there in the middle. And then the red is the lowest ever recorded at these sites, and it goes through the year. And so we've been flirting right along the very bottom there. So So right now, we've received about 50%, 55 to 50% of our average precipitation. But our models were still freaking out, and this is why they were freaking out last fall. So when I went to school about 25 years ago, there was really good data that was done, and they would look at how much snow was happening and then how much water was in the rivers. And there was a good correlation, but they were missing something. And what they realized is that the amount of water in the soils is a big determining factor about our runoff. And so now at these very sophisticated sites, we actually measure how much water is in the soil. We go down a couple inches and measure there, and we go down and we go there. So October 1st, we stick the data into the models, and they spit out this really stupid answer. And why it was, is we looked at the soil saturation, how much water was in the soil. And so the blue line is the maximum ever recorded. The green line is average, and so what happens is that, it starts to melt, the snow starts melting, so this goes up. The red was the lowest ever recorded. Well, black is this year. So also we have a scenario that our models have never seen before. And so they spit out stupid numbers, and so we started getting nervous about it. I'm like, okay, we should be fine. We'll get a good snowpack, rain. But that last slide to show you that actually was one of our worst years ever for precipitation. And so that's a big concern. And so when we look at that map and it showed our area as the darkest red that they could find, that's the reason why. And that's why we're so concerned. And we see that. So on the Virgin River and the Santa River, there's other gauges on that river that we watch very closely. And there's a gauge right by the city of Virgin. And we like that gauge because it has over 100 years of data. And it's really reliable data that's been recorded. And so kind of explain this graph is what happens. This yellow triangle, that's the average runoff. And this is classic. So what happens is cold, it starts to warm up, the snow starts to melt, the river goes up. It goes, on average, it goes up to 300 cubic per second. And to put that in perspective, if you were standing by the river and it has 300 cubic feet per second, and you looked at the river, you'd say, wow, that's dangerous. Like, if I fall in there, I'd probably drown. If you're like, had a little kid, you'd hold onto their hand really tight because you'd be worried about them falling in. So, but that's what should happen during the year. Well, this year is the blue line. And we essentially had absolutely no runoff this year. This was our snow melt, basically right here. And now we're down here. Where the current condition is on the river, even during the time when it should have been flooding, the water was so low that you could just walk across it without a problem. I mean, your feet would get wet, of course. So you could easily stroll across it. You'd let your dog play in it and your kid because it wasn't that much water. And so now we're in that scenario. The other thing that we've learned is how important the monsoonal rains are. So the last 2 summers, we essentially had no monsoonal rains. 2 years ago, we broke a record. We went 155 days without measurable rainfall. Last year, we would have broken that record, except for we had this one real freeze storm kind of come through. So what it's taught us is that when we go into that winter months, if we don't get those monsoonal rains and get that soil saturated, by the time the snow comes along, the ground will just soak up that moisture. And so I'm nervous because monsoon season usually kicks in around the end of July, but they're saying, don't really count on it this year. I don't mean to scare people, but anyways, the fortunate thing here is that individuals that came before us, and there's several names that I made mention, but they spent a hell of a lot of money to build huge projects. And what they built is they built 12 reservoirs, and they built San Paulo Reservoir. They started recharging the aquifer around San Paulo Reservoir. So when I log on, I see our reservoirs are about 75%. So even though the river hasn't done what it's supposed to do, we did get the precipitation we did because we had this great infrastructure in place that was built 30, 40, 50, sometimes 100 years ago. We're able to say, this year I can say, listen, we're going to have water through our taps this year for sure. In fact, I feel comfortable to say that we will have drinking water next year too. Like there's enough there in our reservoirs today for 2 years of this. Now, if we have a repeat of this year, it's going to be very scary. Next year, if we have a repeat, I could see coming out and saying, okay, everybody's grass dies. Like we're just going to stop that. So we take those measures, but you will still be able to flush your toilet, you'll still be able to take a shower and do other things like that. Now let's just kind of repeat what I just said. On the Santa Clara River, most of the water in the Santa Clara River is used for farmers on that side of it, and those farmers are only going to get 30% of the water that they usually get in a typical year. So that also helps put it into perspective. Next, we talked about shuffling. One thing it just happened that we have started this drought planning before it happened. And one thing that we noticed was all the municipalities had a little bit different drought plan, or they didn't have a drought plan. And so we're now in the process of making sure that all the cities are working together to make sure we have the same drought plan. Why that came up is there was another area that went through a drought scenario that was really bad. And what happened was the municipalities didn't have the same requirements. So one community would have really lush green grass, and then in the next neighborhood, their trees were dying. And it created a lot of conflict. And to avoid that, our cities and the water district were coming together and saying, okay, let's make this uniform. So if it goes out, we'll all follow the same requirements. So next year, if we have another bad year, we'll come out and collectively and say, okay, these are the new standards that we all need to follow. And so we're in that process. We actually started this process about a year and a half ago, and we just haven't had any drought. So with the drought, I also have another problem. And it's not my 17-year-old son that I always talk about. It's a growth. So this is a graph I like to show about the population in Washington County. And population here kind of hovered for a while. And then the 1970s hit, and there's two things that happened was, first of all, was air conditioning. It became economically feasible to put an air conditioning into a house. And also, I gave this presentation, someone came up to me and said, and that's also when they started putting air conditioning in cars. That was when it started happening a while. And then also I-15. I was talking to another gentleman that said that in Salt Lake, it used to take them 10 hours to drive from North Salt Lake down to St. George before I-15, where you have to go through all those small little towns and drive through. Where now you can get on a car and get there in 4 hours in speed. So all of a sudden our population takes off, and I don't see that stopping at all. In fact, it was funny, last year, right before COVID hit, and we saw it coming. I thought, okay, I went to my staff and I said, listen, we don't know where it was going to happen with COVID, but we got to get prepared that our impact fees are going to completely drop off. We kind of did this worst case scenario planning, and the exact opposite happened. It just totally took off and boom. And we see that. So the Kinsey-Gardner Institute out of the University of Utah comes in and makes predictions on how many people will be living here. And they look at a lot of different variables to that. So they'll look at how much the land mass is there, and roads, and they look at all these conditions. And when they go out and do that analysis, they come back and say, hey, by 2060, you're going to have about 500,000 people in your community living here. So as a water district, it's our job to make sure there's water for those individuals. So the water district, we don't do anything to promote growth. Like, we don't go out and encourage companies to come or people to move here. We also don't discourage growth. That's just not our job to do that. Our job is simply to respond to growth. And the cities have came out and are issuing building permits and plats, and it's our job to make sure those homes have that water. So I've got this problem now that we're going to have about 300,000 more individuals, 300,000 more people living here in our community. At the same time, our water sources, we're seeing huge stress on those sources, and it does keep me up at night. The other thing that's unique about those numbers, and this was another thing, I'm a data guy, I like data. So when we look at the data, there were some gaps in there. So we actually went back to the University of Utah and we said, your numbers are wrong. And if anybody's worked with universities, they think they're elitist. They don't like being told they're wrong. So we said, well, you're wrong. And they're like, well, we're going to prove that you're wrong. And they came back and said, you're right. And they said, first of all, about 20% to 25% of our homes here are secondary homes. And these individuals will come and live in our community, meaning they will use our resources, our water, our sewer, our roads, but yet in the census data, they don't show up in the census data at all. And so we go out there and look at that, and they came back and they said, even though you have 200,000 people in your community right now, roughly about 200,000, they said, really, you should crack on another 30,000 to that number. Those are individuals that are living here, they're using your facilities, but in the census, they're not showing up because they don't list it as a population. And it correlates really good with about 20% there too. We have major tourists, and all the tourists that come here want to have water. So Zions National Park gets about 4.5 million visitors a year. But Sand Hollow Reservoir last year got 1.4 million people, and this year we're going to be higher. And it was funny too, because when that reservoir was built, so I went back and looked at the minutes, and they're like, they're building the reservoir, and the reservoir was built for drinking water. And somebody said, hey, do you think somebody might want to recreate on this thing? And the water district at the time was like, this was literally the discussion, no one's going to want to go out to Sand Hollow and recreate. I mean, it's hot, it gets windy, there's waves, there's no way anybody will ever want to camp out there. And so literally they're like, who will take this problem off our hands? And so the state parks came and said, we'll run it for you. That was a horrible decision, because now Sand Hollow is making more money off recreation. It's the #1 state park, and they actually take the money from Sand Hollow Reservoir and subsidize most other parks. If I could have that revenue, I could have a lot of fun with it. So the big thing with growth, and there's a lot of discussion going on with growth, and I get inundated with those questions about growth. But the tough thing with growth is there's that huge economic connection to it. And so when we talk about growth and where it's going, it really is dollars. And what's going to happen in our community when those new homes are built, we have a bigger tax base. When a new business comes into the area, we diversify our job, and we're seeing that a lot. And so that's one of the reasons why so the Lake Powell Pipeline, I'll briefly touch on that a little bit later. That's one of the reasons why it's a state of Utah project. So the Utah State Legislature came in and said, listen, we feel the Lake Powell Pipeline is a very important project for economic growth to occur in southern Utah. And we want St. George to be an economic hub or powerhouse someday. And to make that happen, we need to invest in infrastructure. And that's why the state of Utah took on the project. And they're the ones leading in it, developing it. So as a water district, this is kind of our main goals. Is first of all, to just protect what we have. We have wonderful water here, and we want to keep that. So we spend a lot of time making sure our watersheds are healthy. We spend a lot of time working with, we have 3 fish that are endangered, so we work with those fish to make sure they're happy. Then we really spend a lot of time on conservation and developing new projects with ag conversion. We do ag conversion here. My board has a very strong opinion that we will never go and condemn some of these farms and take their water. And that has happened in a lot of other areas. But when we have a farmer that's a willing seller, we will buy those. So for example, I just purchased, well I shouldn't say I, the district just purchased $1 million of water rights shares from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, formerly known as the Mormon Church. And then we're working on, of course, Lake Powell Pipeline and future reviews with that. So with water conservation, we get hit a lot with this question. And we, I think, should actually take pride in what we've done here. So our average citizen today uses about 30% less water than that same citizen used around 2000. And you really can see that. So I was driving around this morning, and you drive through a lot of the newer neighborhoods, and they do a really good job of landscaping. They're reducing their lawn size. The yards aren't as big, but then you go to like an area that was maybe developed in the 80s or 90s, and you see almost grass from property line to property line. And so we're seeing those numbers, and we're really proud of that. We were the first one to meet the governor's goals in water conservation. We have a very aggressive conservation plan. We spent $70 million in conservation. We still have goals for that. So even though people pick on us for not doing enough for conservation, I think we've done a really good job. And you can see it, I didn't realize the slide was in here. But if you drive around, you start seeing a lot of these areas. And so the governor's office had heard this complaint that we're in love with grass down here. Turf, lawn. I'm not supposed to use grass anymore. Well, sorry, I don't use marijuana. So they did a study. They took a typical yard in Salt Lake City. In Salt Lake City, 44% of their lots have just sheer landscaping, and of that landscaping portion of it, 70% of it is lawn. Here in Washington County, it's a lot less. So we only have about 17% covered by vegetation, and of that, only 35% of it is covered by lawn. And so it shows that we're not in love with our lawn down here. I think in the discussions that are going on with the cities, there will be most likely more restrictions coming in place on where turf or lawn or grass is planted in the future. These are a list of our programs that we do. So if somebody has a question about their yard, we'll send somebody out there to look at it. We'll put the little cups out and measure how much weather they're doing. We go to the schools, talk to them. We have rebates that people can come in. In fact, like if you want a smart meter, that's where it's connected to your Wi-Fi, and it'll turn your sprinklers on and off for you if it rains. We'll give $75. I mean, it costs $100, and through us in the state, we'll give $75 towards it. And we see those measures taking steps and saving water. So also when we got criticized by this, we actually went out and hired a firm out of California and said, okay, tell us what we're doing wrong. And they came back and they looked at our program, they're like, you know what, you guys are doing a really good job here. You are, for the Western United States, your programs are on par with the city of your size. We have recently gone back to that same firm and said, no, we want to go a step higher. And so we're in the process of working with the cities. I'm figuring what we can do as a community, how we can take it one step farther. I should read these slides before I do a presentation. Oh, yeah. I really think down in Las Vegas, they pay you to rip out turf or grass or lawn. And I'm really thinking about a year we'll be doing that same thing here. So what most likely will happen is we'll come and say new homes can only have about 10%. And then we will go in and say, okay, if someone wants to rip out their turf or lawn, we can do that. The key to this, though, and this is very important, is Tucson did this and totally screwed up. And what they did, I'm not supposed to shame people, huh? What they did is they just said, they came and they said, rip it all out. And what happened, they ripped it all out, and it got, the average temperature of the city actually increased because of the heat shrink, because of the asphalt and everything. And now they're in the process of actually going back and replanting trees and creating that shade. And so if there is a rebate for having somebody take it out, the key thing there is that we need people not just to leave it raw, but to actually plant other vegetation that doesn't require as much water. So either that's trees or shrubs or something like that to keep that cooling effect. If you go up to the desert gardens up there on the hill by the Dixie Rock, you can see that. You can walk through that garden and you can see how lush and green that is. You can see there's tons of shade. The temperatures are actually cooler in there because of all the shade. And you can see you can have a really beautiful green landscaping with good shade that keeps the temperatures down and use about 30% of the water that lawn would use. The other thing that we look at is 20% of our users are using 40% of our system. And they're very high water users. Here in Washington County, we've done an excellent job keeping our water price really low. So for example, the typical person in St. George with a typical lot spending about $40 for water per month. Where down in Las Vegas, they're spending around $150. If you go up north to some of those municipalities, they're paying over $100. If you compare us like to Denver, they're paying over $100. We've done a really good job keeping our water rates low. But because of that, we know that sometimes the people use a lot of water. And so looking at that, and also those high-end water users, they put a lot of stress on the system. They require us to run our pumps harder. They require us to send water through the water treatment plant faster. And so the board has implemented a surcharge. And essentially what it is, it's still in the process. We just gave notice of it. But it's going to take those highest 20%, 25% water users and crack on additional fees. So you can use up to 36,000 gallons of water and have no surcharge. But once you hit that 36,000 gallon mark, then after that, each additional 1,000 gallons of water would be $1. So if you use 37,000 gallons of water in a particular month, you would have a $1 surcharge. And you're like, well, that's not that much. But we have individuals in our community that are using upwards of 3 million gallons of water a year for landscaping. And so that individual, they'll be paying a lot more for the water. And so the hope is that this will become an educational tool. So a lot of times I go out and somebody's like, I have no idea if I'm using a lot of water or not. Well, if you see on your bill that says excess user water surcharge, you can see that bill, and the goal is that someone will see that, they'll say, oh, I'm in the top 20%. And they'll call us up and say, what can I do to lower our water? And we have these really good incentive programs where we'll send somebody out and say, well, here's the steps you can take to reduce your water use. With the drought scenario, our board came and we asked some goals. And one of the goals that we specifically asked is that the cities and the other government entities take the lead. So we've asked the municipalities to reduce their water use by 10% as compared to last year. We've also met with the school district. The school district has done an amazing job with electricity. Essentially, even though they've added new buildings along the way, their energy consumption and electricity has not increased. And it's because they've been focused on that. So we reached out to the school district and we said, hey, we really want you to start looking at your water use. You have some of the highest water use in the county. I mean, they have those big, beautiful lawns around there. And we want to keep that for the school kids. We're not saying get rid of all of it, but we're saying see what you can do. And so they've agreed to do that, and they're going to start focusing on it. And it really will be, if you drive by a school, some of the grass is essential. Like it really isn't what the residents play on. But there are certain areas that they probably could improve, and they're going to start focusing on that. So my guess is you're going to start seeing some like strips of land through our community turning yellow. And then hopefully this fall, when it's a little bit cooler, they'll go through and re-landscape those and maybe plant trees and other things like that. All right, so this is, I think, who's seen this game before? I'm sure, yeah. So one of the things that happens a lot, well, I'll tell you this story. So I get interviewed by the press a lot. And the press here in the United States, they come and they're very nice, and they're like, oh, tell me about it. So one time I got interviewed by a French reporter, and French reporters are completely different. Every kind of cliche that you ever thought about the French is true with the reporters. So this lady comes up to me, and I really like her. She's really sharp. She's like, her first question, she's like, tell me why you guys are so stupid down here in St. George because you use so much water. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, you guys are really stupid. You use way too much water. I mean, that was her first question. And so I started to explain to her, and I said, well, where did you get that? And she says, well, down in Las Vegas, they're only using 100 gallons of water per day per person, and you're using 300 gallons a day per person of water. So why are you using 3 times more water? Are you flushing your toilets 3 times more? Are you like 3 times the amount of showers? I says, no, it's the measuring stick. And so I want to explain that. And this is kind of the scenario I go through. So we're going to have this game, and what happens is we're going to have a house here, a happy house. We have one individual live in that house, and inside that house he uses 5 gallons of water. Now this is water for like showers or toilets or washing machines. Then in the front yard, and this is water you can drink. In the front yard, he uses another 5 gallons of water for, let's say, the lawns or the trees or whatever. Then in the backyard, he has a small garden, and he uses secondary water or canal water or water you can't, where you're not supposed to drink. So the question is how much water has this person used on this particular day? So I'll make it easy. I'm going to give you multiple choice. So, and I brought this up before. So in engineering school, they teach you to find exact answers. And so, for example, in engineering, a lot of people say, well, what's pi? And so you'll ask people what's pi, and they'll say, well, that's 3.14. And in engineering school, if I wrote 3.14, they'd say that's the wrong answer. Because they're like, it's not 3.14, it's the symbol pi. Because pi is indefinite, it goes on forever and ever. So I could write 100 decimal places below, and it's not an exact answer, so we're going to mark that wrong. You have to find an exact answer. And that's how we train our engineers in the United States to find the answer. So I'm like, this is great. I love this, exact answers. Get my engineering diploma, and then I go to law school. And they're like, okay, so what's the answer? And I was like, oh, it's an exact answer. And they're like, no. It's whatever you can argue. And it's true. So as an engineer, this drives me bad. But as an attorney, I love this because I can argue in a court of law, all answers are correct up here. And so I got to explain how they came up with this. So in the state of Utah, just so you know, we'd say this individual used 15 gallons of water that particular day. It's pretty simple. Other states, they would say 10 because they will only count the treated water, the water that you can drink. They do not count their secondary. They would call that like agriculture water. They just don't count it. So you're like, okay, that makes sense. So the question is, how do you come up with 5 gallons? So this is what they do, and that's pretty smart. So they say, well, we don't count the untreated water. That's ag, so we won't count that. We'll count the 5 gallons of water here that's treated outside. But the 5 gallons inside the house, we get all that water back, so it's not really being used. So if they take a shower, the average American uses about 20 to 30 gallons of water per shower. But then it goes right back to the sewer system, back to the system. So they say, well, that's returned. We got the water back. Yeah, it's a little different now. It's got some dirt and soap scum and stuff. But so they will say this person didn't use any water inside that house. So just so you know, this is what they do in Las Vegas. So in Las Vegas, they'd say, well, we're only saying 5 gallons of water for this person. So when somebody comes and says, in St. George, you're using 300 gallons, and in Las Vegas, they're using 100 gallons, this is why. We're saying we're counting every single drop of water. We're counting our water, that even though it goes, but in Las Vegas, if it goes in our sewer system, they don't count that water because they're like, well, it's coming back to us, so it's not really used. So the other thing is how can somebody come up with 3.3? And I could argue it. So what they do in this municipality, they count the 5 and the 5. So they'll say this person used 10 gallons of water. But then they go and they're like, well, our census data says that we actually have 3 people per home. And so instead of counting, assuming there's 1 person, we're going to assume there's 3 people. So they take 10 gallons and then they divide it by 3 and come up with 3.3 gallons of water. And so as someone that's involved in this, it's very, very frustrating because we get accused of this. So Springdale, Utah, if you go to them, they're using 1,500 gallons of water per day per person. So and so it comes up like, what are they doing? I've had people come and say, what are the people in Springdale doing up there with all this water? The problem is if you have 1 resident, then you have like 20 hotel rooms. And that 1 resident gets all those hotel rooms counted against them. So it's a big problem. And so when I talk about conservation, we actually are doing pretty good. When we try to compare apples to apples, we are higher than Las Vegas, but we're on par with Las Vegas too. We're not out of the woods. So to deal with the drought, to deal with all this growth, we're trying to do lots and lots of projects. Okay, I'll bring it here. And so we just completed, if you go out to Sand Hollow, we just completed a Sand Hollow treatment center. These projects are very expensive. That's $11 million. Ash Creek, as you're going up to, as you're driving north on I-15, you get to Anderson Junction. Not this fall, but next fall, we're going to start construction on the reservoir right there. They talked about it for a long time, but we finally are getting the permits from the BLM, and that's estimated to be a $64 million project. Our Quail Creek treatment plant, right now it's designed for about 60 million gallons of water per day, and so we're reaching that limit, so we're going to be expanding that. We're also, there's new requirements for the EPA saying that we need to add new additional treatment methods. Even though we have really good water here, we have pristine water, and when we do the testing, it's really pristine. Like we don't have a lot of contaminants other municipalities have. The EPA is requiring additional treatment measures, and it's one of those things. It's actually not a bad idea to have just one more level of safety on it. So we'll be expanding that, and that's estimated about $46 million. The Lake Powell pipeline. We're still working on that. Where that's at, we put out a draft environmental document. We received a lot of comments back, and a lot of individuals want additional data done, analysis done, and so we agreed to do that. So we're in the process of redoing that data. For example, we modeled the river all the way down to Lake Powell. And one of the comments came that says, hey, we really want you to model it down to Lake Mead. So we've agreed to do that. And so we're in that process. So another EIS, or they call it a supplemental EIS, will come out. With the Lake Powell pipeline, we're expecting to start construction in 2026-ish, and get that process going. So a lot of people say, what happens if we don't do the Lake Powell pipeline? And here's the thing that I need to warn people about, is in 10 years, 3 things are going to happen. Either A, we're just not going to issue any more building permits. We're just done. We're out of water. And we can't do anything else. The second thing we can do is conservation. Now, we're planning to do conservation, even with the Lake Powell pipeline. We're planning to take those steps and ask people to do things, and they have done it, but we're planning to do that. But then we get to the extreme measure. So, I was talking about, we'll have somebody rip out their lawn, but then we'll have them plant trees. Well, the extreme measure is we rip out the trees too. We rip out the soccer fields. We rip out, and it gets to be a community that I wouldn't want to live in, to be honest with you. But that's one option. Or we'll have the Lake Powell pipeline, and we'll have a secure source of water for basically the next 3 or 4 generations. I talked about the timeline. I know my time's coming in. So a lot of people say, hey, Lake Powell's going down. Like, is there water there? So there was an original agreement that was done in 1922, the original compact. And of that, Utah is only using a small portion of their water. Other basin states have been using not only their share, but actually over that. So a lot of that ring around those reservoirs, because certain states were taking more than their allocation for years and years and years, brought those reservoirs down. I will say now they're getting on board, and they're coming on board. But we just want to use a small portion. Utah's using only about 50-ish% of their allocation. And so with Lake Powell pipeline, we bump it up to about 55%. And if every state only took, let's say, 55% of their allocation, Lake Powell and Lake Mead would be built within a couple of years. So I wanted to leave how much time do I have? 9 minutes. I wanted to leave some time for questions, because last time I was here, I had some really great questions. So, that was fast.
I just want you to touch on 2 rumors I keep hearing. One is Warner Valley can be turned into a reservoir pumped from San Paulo, and the other one is Little Valley sits on a big giant pond.
Sure. So 2 things. So with Warner Valley, that was supposed to be built 2 years ago. So they were going to build it, and then Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And so the project got put on delay. And that's how long they've been talking about Warner Valley. So when I say it's going to be built, but this is our current plan. About 2 years, so Warner Valley is owned by 2 entities. One is Sitla, and the other one's from the BLM. So 2 years ago, we actually purchased the land from Sitla, and we're right now in the process of doing a land swap with the BLM. And so that paperwork is sitting on somebody's desk back in Washington, D.C. So I hope to be able to own all the land within about 1.5 years. So once we own the land, then we can, that's a huge step forward. They've never even gotten that far. So that's the plan with Warner Valley. So I can see Warner Valley possibly coming online in about 8 to 10 years. Regardless of the Lake Powell pipeline that's going to be built. And what we would do with Lake Powell to get the water in Warner Valley is we'll take sewer water and treat that and pump it in there. We'll take water from the Virgin River during high flow scenarios and pump that in there. And then we'll most likely have to mix it with some water from San Paulo. With Little Valley, there's water out there. You're more than welcome to pump it and drink it. It'll kill you. Just FYI. And it will kill all your landscaping around it. So there is water there. There's not a lot of water. Like it can quickly be pumped right quickly. And I'm worried about over pumping that, because if you pump it up for too hard, sometimes you have adverse effects on the ground surface. The ground will start to subside. And also we have a lot of flood irrigating that's been going on for a long time, and so I know that groundwater has been supplemented by that flood irrigating, that as it's converting to homes, that's starting to go away. So there is water there, but it's really nasty water. It's not water you could drink. The only way we could do anything with it is send it through reverse osmosis, which is extremely expensive, it has some big environmental hurdles. So that was a good question.
Yeah, just have a question. Learning a lot about the Ronald, many of us are here, very, I don't want to be fearful, but we have to look at the reality. It's always different. She made a comment, she said,
Yeah.
We're all hoping the hypothetical scientists to say, you're in drought, it's going to be more severe than this. What's going to take place?
Yeah, so as water planners, we're very pessimistic. We always assume the worst. And so we have been planning for a hotter and drier climate. I don't know where people say, well, are you for climate change or against climate change? I don't know if you really can be for climate change or against it. It's just one of those things that will happen to us. Or global, or variabilities, all the different political terms. Regardless of that, we're assuming a hotter, drier climate, and if it doesn't rain, we'll have more water in Sand Hall, the water ski on. If we don't, we'll be prepared for that. So the plan is we'll see what this year does. And let's say we have another horrible season, then we use about 60% of our water outside on our lawns. Or I shouldn't say lawns, on our outside irrigation. So I can see a scenario where we have a dismal year again. And so at that point, I'll be going to the cities and saying, I need you to declare an emergency and basically outlaw certain behaviors. And so when other communities have done that, they shut off outside landscaping. They start closing down car washes. And so there's the steps that you go to get to that point. So I don't see a scenario where we don't have water in the drinking taps, but I can see a scenario where certain activities that we're enjoying today will be cut back. Now, even though I plan for the worst, I pray and I hope for the best. We can have a really good water year, and next year I'll be like, yeah, can you imagine the flood that just happened? And if you look at the variability, that happens quite a bit on the Virgin River. I would say also, as a guy that is responsible to make sure that there's water in your taps, that's one of the reasons why I like the Lake Powell pipeline, because we are in the Virgin River Basin, and it's a small little basin that has huge amounts of variability, and engineers hate variability, right, Nate? Nate? I'm picking on Nate Moses. And the Lake Powell pipeline takes a huge variability rate, because on the Colorado, we have calls on the Virgin River 9 out of 10 years. This is the first year there's ever been a call on the Colorado River. And you have a massive, massive infrastructure. So 3 years ago, we had a great wet winter. Lake Powell went up 50 feet, and we've still been living off that for a while. I don't have that option. As an engineer, I'd love to put up a dam right across the Virgin River. It'll never happen. But I can take more variability out. So that's one of those things, is to help address that issue. So in 30 years from now, when I'm hopefully retired, and our kids are getting to the point where they're taking over the economy, they have that safe water source. Yeah, way back there, in the blue shirt.
You said there's a projection for no monsoons this year, or little monsoon, but where does that come from?
So NOAA comes out with these models, and I don't assume to understand these models, but they basically look at where the jet stream has been, the temperature of the oceans, and everything that go on. And so they will give us predictions about 3 months out. And so right now, if you look, they don't come out and say no monsoon, they just come out and say, predict a hotter, drier scenario for the next 3 months in this area. And if you look at that, it's right over our area. And so they're saying basically southern Utah will be hotter and drier for the next 3 months. And I mean, heck, it's hot out there. Yeah, the red shirt guy. Sorry.
What about the aquifers, and isn't it cheaper to drill down and grab some of that water than building a pipeline?
So we do have certain aquifers, and I could go through the county and tell you about each aquifer and how they're unique. And so there are aquifers, but we're actually starting to deplete some of those aquifers right now. And that's one of the reasons why Sand Hall was built, was to help put water back in the aquifer. Cokerville Reservoir is the same thing. So, like over by Leeds, Angel Springs about a year ago said all our springs are drying up because you're pumping too much water out of the ground. And we had an individual come in and look at it and said, no, it's not your wells, it's actually Leeds. And so we're working with Angel Springs. But the concept of just drilling down and getting more water, you only go down so far, and the water is either two things. Either it's not there, because where the water is stored underneath the ground is there's space between the rocks. You look under a magnifying glass. And as you go deeper, the pressures get such with the rock that it squishes out those areas. Then the other thing is that the water that is there has a lot more solids in it, or salts, minerals. And so you can pump it up, and you have to send it through reverse osmosis. So there has been some very deep wells drilled in our county. Like, I'll use Hilldale. Hilldale drilled down, they had a well that went 3,000 feet deep. They did find about 1,000 gallons per minute of water, but then you have to pump that water up from the very bottom. Then then you have to send it to reverse osmosis through another very expensive process. So it becomes very, very expensive water. And then it's only 1,000 gallons per minute. It's not a huge amount of water. Like Enterprise, that aquifer up there, it's actually dropping 2 feet. What they've done is, originally they drilled the well 50 feet, dried it up, then they went to 100 feet, they dried it up, and they went to 200, and it's dropping. And so that's another thing, is we try to find that equal balance with aquifers, of not mining them, and making sure that whatever's being recharged in those aquifers are about the same. So we have, in our system we have about 30 wells. With the cities, I bet you there's probably about 50 or 55 wells that we use for drinking water, and we monitor those water levels. So I got the 2-minute sign.
Yeah, so by far the largest water users are farmers. Yet farmers are reluctant to sell their water in their land. Have we looked into any, farmers seem to be willing to set aside a program for the government or whatever. Have we thought about long-term uses with farmers in the water?
So yes, so before Utah state law prohibited that, there were some issues with that, and so and we were a big advocate for this and helped lobby for it. This Utah state legislature just came up with what's called water banking, where I could go and now pay a farmer to drive this field for so many years and it won't hurt him in the long run. So we're looking at that, and then most of these fields are now being turned into homes, and we buy those water rights when they come available. And so we are doing a lot of that. The tough thing that we have here is like the water in Washington Fields area, that's really nasty water. Well, it's very expensive. You have to send it to reverse osmosis to drink it. So, sorry, I'm getting this on 30 seconds. And so I will stand up, I'll be up here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Also, this is Carrie. She's with the Water District, and she will also, if you have questions, come up. If you have more questions, I encourage you to go to our website, wcwct.org. We're really big into making sure you have all the information. So if we do an engineering study, it's on there. On the Lake Powell pipeline, every single study that's ever been completed on the Lake Powell pipeline, everything that's been submitted, it's there. You can just read it. You print it out. It's about this high, but you're more than welcome to do that. Anyways, I really appreciate the time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach. We appreciate all that you shared with us today. Also, we found a phone outside. I think you probably know if George, come up and see me afterwards and get that to you. Don't forget, just give me a minute. Just don't forget, our next follow-up to this is going to be July 15th, and I believe it is here, and we will go into more water with Nathan, and we look forward to that. We'd like to thank the committee today that put all this together. Let's give them a round of applause. And we'd like to thank Bardell and Angie and Linda and Judy and Mandy, everybody over at the board. Let's give them a round of applause too. Appreciate you all being here. You have a good afternoon. We'll see you.